According to our calculations, the break-even point of milk value was around $10 per 100 pounds.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Dairy Science Digest. This is a podcast designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to the ears of dairy producers. My name is Reagan Bluel, and I'm from the University of Missouri Dairy Team, and today we're meeting with Dr. Zelmar Rodriguez from Michigan State University. We all know that getting the lactation started off right is the key to success, and there's several parts to that equation, but one is well understood, that if that cow gets mastitis, she's just slow to start. And so Dr. Rodriguez and his team of researchers, they were working towards possible solutions to attack subclinical mastitis there in early lactation in hopes of capturing a cure that will improve profit over her entire lactation. So we're focused in on this month's featured Journal of Dairy Science article titled "The Economic Impact of the Treatment of Subclinical Mastitis in Early Lactation Using Intramammary Nisin." So Zelmar, welcome to the Dairy Science Digest. And before we get going, could you please introduce yourself a bit to the audience?
Yes, Regan, thank you for having me. My name is Zelmar Rodriguez. I'm a dairy veterinarian. I'm originally from Uruguay. I work in the dairy industry during 5 years in Uruguay and in New Zealand. I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota. And after that, I joined Michigan State University, where I work right now as an assistant professor at the Veterinary College Large Animal Clinical Science Department. I have a three-way appointment. I do teaching for veterinary students and graduate students, but most of my time is dedicated to research and extension activities. And so my research focuses essentially on developing effective management strategies to optimize sustainability in dairy farming, mostly from a milk quality point of view.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And so that obviously makes sense that you were looking at different drugs to potentially help milk quality. And so let's dive right in. So what exactly is Nisin? Am I even saying that correctly? Nisin.
Nisin, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, nisin is an antimicrobial peptide, is naturally produced by a bacteria called Lactococcus lactis, and it has a gram-positive spectrum of activity. It has been around actually for a long time as a food preservative, but more recently it has been explored as a drug to treat mastitis.
Yeah, so it's a preservative agent. And so as I was kind of reading up on it a little bit, so I guess it's commonly used maybe in say fruit and vegetable production. Would that be safe to say?
Well, yes, and the thing is that it's not toxic for humans, and I'm pretty sure that most of us have consumed sometimes some product containing niacin, yes.
Sure, because it's naturally producing. And so I just want to say really up front before I lose any listenership here in the early stages of the podcast, this does not require the dump of milk, right? And so kind of just keep listening and let's learn a little bit about it. How did you determine if these cows had subclinical mastitis?
Yes, let me mention something that you said before. One of the greatest benefit of niacin is that doesn't require milk discard. And if you think on the drugs that we have available today, we have 5 drugs nowadays. And if you follow label instructions, or if in case of safety of food, you are using a short treatment duration, we are talking about 4 to 5 days of milk discard.
Right.
At the current prices, that is very costly. But to answer your question about how to determine a cow is subclinical, well, in this model that we did with our colleagues, we identify subclinical mastitis based on California Mastitis Test, CMT. This is a very popular test. The benefit is that we can identify subclinical mastitis at the quarter level. It is an imperfect test. We can identify cows with a minimum of traces, which would be equivalent to around 400, 500,000 cells per ml. So you can imagine that the specificity is pretty good. We can identify healthy cows with a lot of confidence, but the sensitivity is not great. We are missing some cows that can be actually sick.
Well, and so that California mastitis test, it's been around for decades. And as I was reading your paper, I was thinking to myself, I bet there's a paddle and some purple solution in nearly every dairy barn that's listening in today, right? It might be collecting dust. Far too often, a lot of guys have it available, but maybe we haven't implemented it into our fresh cow protocol, and perhaps that might be something to consider, because I was really impressed with how accurate California mastitis test to be. And really there's only a false positive about 19% of the time. And so basing these treatment protocols off of the California mastitis test gives you that exact quarter on the exact day that you're wanting to look at it, and helps empower dairy producers from the pit at the cow side to make some decisions. So what day did you really target in early lactation, and why?
We assume CMT test by day 4 and day 10 in milk, so that would be around day 7. So essentially, we decided to use CMT because, first of all, it's a great tool, but we need to remember that when we apply a treatment, what we want is to identify quarters with an intramammary infection. What the CMT tells us is if somatic cell count is high. Most of the cases, as you mentioned, high somatic cell count was associated with an intramammary infection. Was not always the case. There was something like 18% of what would be false positive, so cows with high somatic cell count or a mistake in the identification, but didn't have an infection.
Yeah.
So we want to avoid those. Now, we decided at day 7 do a test because what we wanted was to prevent a potential infection, so clinical infection, to develop over time. Essentially, if you have a cow that have an infection, that infection can become chronic, can become clinical, which is associated with clinical treatment and milk discard, or can eventually spontaneously cure. If you are able to stop the cycle as early as possible, you will have greater benefits. That's why we choose very early on making the test and intervention.
You bet. Absolutely. Well, and I guess if I could rewind just a little bit, for those of you that have used the purple solution in the California mastitis test, but you don't necessarily understand how it's working, he's talked about how it's identifying those somatic cells, right? And so those white blood cells inside the solution will break open. And that purple solution will bind to the contents of the white blood cells that are there, likely fighting some sort of intramammary infection. And so that's why in the paddle you're starting to see it gel up and such, because it's actually responding to the content white blood cell that's breaking open. So you get a negative test on the CMT if you have no white blood cells or no infection or low somatic cell count. But maybe she could have white blood cells in her mammary gland that's not affiliated with the intramammary infection, but most of the time it is. Let's be real. She just doesn't often have white blood cells there unless there's a reason, right? So if we talk a little bit more about those intramammary infections, can you dive into what factors determine the effectiveness of this niacin treatment?
Well, based on our model, milk yield, productivity of the cow was the most important by far. But there was also some other factors, the cost of the drug, the bacteriological cure rate, the pathogen causing the intramammary infection, which is also associated with the cure rate, and the test characteristics. I would say those were the most important ones.
Okay, so there's all types of different mastitis. What types of mastitis does this niacin treatment not touch?
It doesn't target Staph aureus or gram negatives. If you think about subclinical mastitis, usually is caused by gram positive pathogens, but because Staph aureus usually has very low spontaneous cure rate and bacteriological cure rate, even using drugs, it is not in the label. And in our model, what we assume is that if you have intramammary infections, by Staph aureus or gram-negative and you give the drug, there is absolutely no benefit. It would be a loss of drug, essentially.
Yeah, you'd lose the cost of the actual drug. Golly, we just can't seem to find the silver bullet for Staph aureus or E. coli, those gram negatives, mean Klebsiellas that kills cows. We're not there yet, but this will definitely help towards your gram positive, which are more commonly going to be causing your subclinical mastitis there in early milk anyway.
Yeah,
So
the good thing about intramammary infections caused by gram negatives is that most of the cases they spontaneously cure. I think that we tend to oversee the ability of the cow to mount an immunological response and actually spontaneously cure, right? And that is what happened with most of the gram negative cases. That is, if you think on clinical mastitis, we tend to say, do culture, know what you have, and if it's a gram negative, just don't treat. Let the cow deal with that.
Those supportives. I call those your gold star cows, right? If she's supported enough to where she has that immunological response, she's just going to self-cure and then she gets a gold star, right? Just like in kindergarten, all the kiddos that learn how to spell get a gold star. And so she just does what she's supposed to do. But those gram negatives, they can be pretty evil, for sure. Can you expand on milk yield? So was it high producing or low producing cows that have better responses?
The ones that had better responses were the high producing cows. Let me give you a bit of background on the analysis that we did. Essentially, we calculated the cost of subclinical mastitis, right? If a cow get infected, we'll have different outcomes. As I mentioned, can spontaneously cure, can become clinical or chronic, or transmit the disease to our cows. If we can prevent this cow to get sick, to progress to a clinical stage or transmit the disease, that will have a positive impact. If the cow is a high producer cow, the economic benefit would be higher,
Much
right?
larger. Yeah, more milk.
So those are the high producing cows are the cows that if you want to make a protocol and target certain cows, those are the ones that will give you the higher, the larger benefit, economic benefit. And if you think about are essentially the multipurpose cows, right? Second lactation, third lactation are the higher producers.
Yeah, well, let's dive right into there as far as economic benefit. Let's focus in on the multiparous animals. What sort of return on investment do you think dairymen should expect from a treatment in niacin?
Well, we had an average of $19. So essentially, if you have a cow infected and you don't do anything at all, which is the status quo right now during lactation, that will have a cost of subclinical mastitis. Now, if you do the treatment with Nisin, follow the CMT and the treatment, that will reduce the cost of mastitis by $19 per cow.
What does treatment look like? Is it a serial treatment every 12 or 24 hours? What's the label recommend?
The label was 3 intramammary tubes, 12 hours apart. So it's essentially a day and a half.
When you're trying to decide as a herdsman whether or not you're going to implement this project, what are some assessments that you should really dive into to make sure that this is a good idea to begin with your fresh cows?
Right. Well, definitely, I would say milk price. As milk is more valued, the cost effectiveness of the treatment makes more sense. And this is the same for any drug intervention. According to our calculations, the break-even point of milk value was around $10 per 100 pounds, which is way lower than the current price. And that is a good thing because at the current price, which is around $19, $20 per 100 pounds, essentially most of the herds would benefit from the intervention. When the price dropped to 13, 12, $10, then it's more difficult to have a positive economic return. But I think with the current prices, we are far from that low, fortunately.
Yeah, right. Well, and I guess I would challenge listeners that while we're waiting on FDA to kind of dot their I's and cross their T's, perhaps maybe we could all implement a subclinical mastitis assessment in our fresh cows, because it never hurts to know what the prevalence is. And always with mastitis, regardless, here we've got an opportunity to treat, a tool in our toolbox, but the best thing, of course, is prevention. And so as you're going through and assessing all your fresh cows and determining what rate of subclinical mastitis you currently have in your first week of lactation, maybe you could look back to your close-up cow pen and reassess bedding opportunities or overstocking. There's all sorts of different assessments that you can look at there prior to freshening that could have implications on subclinical mastitis prevalence in your herd.
Exactly. And I would like to highlight training. That is
Mm-hmm.
important. It is true that the prevention is what pays the most, is the most effective strategy. We have been working on a research project right now, training farm personnel and measuring milk quality. And let me tell you, training people on how to do a proper milking routine impact positively the milk quality, the ability of employees to identify clinical cases in the parlor, to do a
Yeah.
proper disinfection that will reduce new intramammary infections. So keep your people updated on what they have to do and why they have to do it. That's definitely will have a positive impact on reducing mastitis.
Guarantee it. Also, and even training within the treatment protocol of this niacin, because it maybe she's a false positive, but if you insert this tube incorrectly, you could be inoculating her with some sort of pathogen, right? And so,
Exactly.
cleanliness even at the treatment level. So awesome. I can't wait to see. You've got to publish that training paper. That'll
It's,
be a good one.
yeah, it was super exciting. I thought that for a moment, I thought I won't find anything, you know?
Yeah,
That type of studies that you think that you spend the whole summer working and you have,
right,
but actually
right.
it turned out really, really nice. So
That's awesome. And that's the human element of dairy farming, and we can't get away from it, and those boots on the ground that are doing the daily tasks, if they're not in the know, you're sunk. So I was reading through the paper, and the model was talking about some true savings, some tangible savings when you modeled on 1,000 cow dairy. Can you talk about, what would be the cost of implementing this niacin versus its return?
yes, well, that, as you say, will depend of the size of the herd. We model 1,000 cows herd just to give a clear number of what will be a savings at the herd level, which were around $12,000, depending on the type of herd. We gave a range, but we also gave the savings at the cow level. So any producer that have 500 cows, 100 cows could relate to those values. So the values at the cow level, the savings per cow should be the same, around $20, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think of at the prevention management, the milking process, the way how we do the California mastitis test, the milk price, all those factors don't vary by the size of the farm.
Right.
So yes, the individual cow cost would be similar.
It's definitely a fairly complex model that goes into trying to create the economic assessment of something like this, because I think every listener out there realizes that milk price is certainly not static, and so yeah. But even with all of those assessments, the model clearly said that greater than 90% of the time, you're going to get a positive return from this niacin treatment. And I think that sounds really positive. And maybe there is the black and white research model, all of those different data collected. But guys, isn't it easier when she just doesn't have mastitis, right? And if this is something that can help prevent that, sometimes there's just really not a dollar amount you can apply towards just the knowledge that you're helping her get into the next phase of production more effectively. So, but it is really nice when it returns $19 a cow, also covering all costs. So, very good. Well, where are we at on FDA approval? Can guys purchase these tubes tomorrow?
Not tomorrow, as I know, the company. The company is called Musel. They still have the product under FDA review. I was actually talking last week at the National Mastitis Council conference with a representative, but they told me that they expect to launch the product in any time in 2024. So hopefully we will have another tool at our disposal to work around mastitis.
That's fantastic news, and I love having tools in our toolbox that we can use to make management of our dairy herd easier. So we have all got that CMT bottle of solution, maybe collecting dust because we don't take the time to pull the paddle out, but we do call the milk tester out every month. Could we just use those hot sheets from DHIA to treat with niacin? Would that work?
Well, it may work, yes. DHI, I mean, it's a great tool, and if you are already using it, I think that you should take advantage of that. The limitant of the DHI is that it's collected at the cow level. So we have a composite sample. So if you have a cow diagnosed as subclinical, let's say over
Sure.
200,000, the infected quarter will have to at least 700,000 cells per ml. So that means that you are leaving behind many subclinical cows. So, and then you still need to do a CMT because you need to identify which is the quarter with subclinical.
You wouldn't want to treat all 4 of them, no.
Exactly, you don't want to treat the 4. So, if you think at the herd level, at the cow level makes sense because you are more certain after a DHI and CMT that the cow that you have effectively have high somatic cell count and is more likely to be infected, but you are leaving many other cows behind. So at the herd level may not be the optimal approach. But this is something that the producer needs to discuss with the veterinarian and depending on a risk that the producer is willing to take, maybe a good option too.
Yeah, every herd's a little bit different. And so definitely taking that into consideration and working with your herd vet for the appropriate protocol. One of my favorite questions to ask, is there one specific take-home thing that you'd like boots on the ground dairymen to gain from your informative project?
Well, if I had to give you a take-home message, I would say, well, first of all, I want the dairymen to know that there is a new tool coming. And if you are planning to use it in your herd, I would say it makes total economic and biological sense. As any new product in the market, I would say start easy, have your house in order with the prevention strategies, have your cows clean, get your milking protocol very well known by your employees, and then maybe you can start by high-producing cows, talking with your veterinarian and checking new clinical mastitis cases, new chronic cases, and adjusting the protocol to identify subclinical cows as you prefer, as is more convenient for the management situation of the farm. And if you feel comfortable and willing to continue, I would say then would be a good time to extend the treatment to the rest of the herd.
Very good. Well, Dr. Rodriguez, this has been very informative, and I want to thank you for your time.
Reagan, was a pleasure to be here talking to you, and thank you for the listeners also for their time.
And listeners, I applaud you for taking time out of your day today to learn a little bit more about how to stop subclinical mastitis right in the tracks. I've really enjoyed our conversation. This has been the February edition of the Dairy Science Digest, which is a monthly podcast project designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to your ears. We highlight peer-reviewed research articles that are actively in press in the Journal of Dairy Science. It's sound science that you can base your management decisions on, provided by your University of Missouri dairy team. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get future editions straight to your cell phone. This has been Reagan Bluel with the Dairy Science Digest, and I hope you have a great day.